In this Leanpreneur episode, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite quotes, which is true cost is the size of a plum seed. And I actually, when I was reading Taiichi Ohno, I love this quote because it really shows you. So if you look at the plum seed, my God, that was a bad drawing of a plum seed. I guess this is it. And you've got the seed in here. Is basically what he's saying is that the actual cost of the product is probably the size of a plum seed. And what happens is that traditional accounting, especially cost accounting, comes into play and totally distorts the cost of whatever that product is. So for instance, one of the things that Taiichi Ohno talks about in the Toyota production system framework is that his number one waste or sin, whatever you want to call it, is overproduction. So what happens is that he gives you an example that if this is your seed, he says this is the actual cost of it, and then he gives you an example that if in terms of personnel, so for instance, if you're trying to produce a part and you have 3 processes and each person, for instance, produces more than they actually need to produce, which means they overproduced, and once they overproduce, then what you have to do is if you produce a bunch of parts but you only need one, then you have to store these somewhere. So you got to put them into storage. You have to transport them, of course, these parts into storage, and then what he talks about is that you also have to have somebody count and track these parts. So what happens is in the traditional accounting is then in cost accounting is that all these different costs get bundled up as part of the product cost. So Taiichi Ohno, who was probably the most ferocious enemy of waste in any business process, tells you that the true cost is the size of a plum seed. So when you look at your startup or your growing business, whatever, look at it from a perspective of what activities, value-added activities are really involved in building the product or service, whatever you're doing. And I find this very revolutionary because it's a simple analogy. So whenever I eat a plum, I always think of Taiichi Ohno, and I think like, oh yeah, he's right. True cost is the size of a plum seed. And so what happens is all these people add all these other costs into it, and then you really don't understand what the true actual cost of the product is, because if you know the true cost of the product, then you actually know how to streamline your processes, how to eliminate any waste that doesn't add value to it, and then how to price the product in the marketplace. Because if you think about it, is if you remember my minus cost principle, okay, so it's price minus cost equals margin. Because he was so focused on lowering the cost of whatever that is, product, process, you name it, Taiichi Ohno, then you know that out of this entire cost, only the small seed, the size of a plum, is involved. And so if you can eliminate all this other stuff, then you can increase your profit or your margin. Yeah, it's that simple. Easier said than done, believe me. After studying Toyota production system for about 15 years, it is easier said than done. But once you get it, you really get it. Until next time.